This is the BBC. For details of our complete range of programmes, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
Welcome to the latest global news, compiled in the early hours of the morning on Saturday the 27th of January. I'm Janat Jalil with a selection of highlights from across BBC World Service News today. Coming up, President Trump tells the world's elite at Davos that America first is not America alone.
We support free trade, but it needs to be fair and it needs to be reciprocal.
We find out how it went down with business leaders. Also, pressure mounts on the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo to leave office, but he denies he's standing in the way of democracy.
Probably the most important thing is not necessarily the elections, but what's more important is what happens after.
Research suggests that trying to swat mosquitoes may make them less likely to bite us.
We trained the mosquitoes by exposing them to both the scent of someone and pairing this smell with a punishment.
And hundreds of chefs from around the world attend the funeral in Lyon of one of the pioneers of Nouvelle Cuisine, Paul Bocuse. But first, American presidents usually avoid the annual gathering of the world's political and business elite at Davos, fearing it will make them look out of touch. So there was some surprise at Donald Trump's decision to attend this week, the first US president to do so for 18 years. In his address, Mr. Trump told delegates that while he was there to represent America first, he also wanted to do business with the rest of the world.
The world is witnessing the resurgence of a strong and prosperous America. I'm here to deliver a simple message. There has never been a better time to hire, to build, to invest, and to grow in the United States. America is open for business, and we are competitive once again.
Donald Trump told delegates that he would fight to restore integrity, as he put it, to global trade.
We support free trade, but it needs to be fair and it needs to be reciprocal. Because in the end, unfair trade undermines us all. The United States will no longer turn a blind eye to unfair economic practices, including massive intellectual property theft, industrial subsidies, and pervasive state-led economic planning.
Our business editor, Simon Jack, is in Davos. He told me more about what Mr. Trump had to say.
Today's speech, I think, was part victory lap, part sales pitch. He started by giving himself a glowing self-assessment of what he's done for the US economy. He pointed to a booming stock market, strong economic growth in the US, low unemployment, and he said, look what I have done. And here's the good news, guys, in the room. What is good for America is good for the rest of the world. So he was absolutely unapologetic about his America First message. And there was a carrot and a stick that he brandished both this week. The stick was earlier this week he put tariffs on washing machines, on solar panels from China, from Mexico and other places, saying, look, I mean business when I say that countries which basically subsidise or through intellectual property theft don't play by the rules, I will come down on them hard. The carrot is I have reduced corporation tax, I have reduced regulation. So if you want to sell stuff to American consumers in the world's largest economy, be my guest, come here, set up in America, and you are most welcome. So that was his message. Basically, what's good for America is good for the rest of the world, so come and do your business here. It was an unashamed promotional speech to say America's the place to do business.
And you talk about tax cuts. I mean, it's been quite some tax cut, $1.5 trillion. How has his speech gone down with business leaders who have in the past been quite critical of him?
Basically, he got a pretty good hearing today because for many businesses, they like lower taxes. You know, lower taxes means higher profits. What's not to like about that? So they, you know, if you talk to the American investment banks, I spoke to the boss of JP Morgan this week, I spoke to the boss of Goldman Sachs this week, they're going to get, you know, JP Morgan alone will get a $20 billion windfall from this tax cut over the next 5 years. The question will be, how are they going to spend that money? Now, what Donald Trump wants them to do is invest more in the US, create more jobs, And this is a sort of classic trickle-down kind of economics that we heard about during the Reagan years. He thinks that if you get businesses to invest in the US by attracting them with lower taxes, that will create more jobs for the US economy. Those US consumers will buy goods from all around the world, so a US tax cut is good for the entire world. Now, and on the whole, the business audience likes that. Now, of course, in Davos, you've got lots of NGOs, you've got unions here who don't necessarily share that. But I think basically the audience liked him more than they were expecting to like him, and Donald Trump liked the audience more than he was expecting to like them. So actually, it was a much more conciliatory, less antagonistic affair than many had feared or expected.
Simon Jack in Davos. A victory for innovation and the rule of law. That's how the Canadian manufacturer Bombardier has described a legal decision in the United States. A trade panel there rejected claims by the US giant Boeing that Bombardier aircraft were illegally subsidised by the Canadian government. Our business correspondent Theo Leggett has been following developments.
This is about an aircraft that was developed by Bombardier, a relatively small player compared to the likes of Boeing and Airbus in the commercial aircraft market. It's something which could be pitted against some of the smaller models made by Boeing and Airbus. It's a very well-developed aircraft called the C-Series, and it's in very much the early stages, and Bombardier has been trying to sell it in the US market. Boeing didn't like that. It said that Bombardier was selling it at below cost price, was effectively dumping subsidised aircraft onto the American market, and issued a formal complaint. The US Commerce Department agreed with Boeing and recommended that these aircraft should have major tariffs imposed on them, which would basically have quadrupled their price in the United States and could have sounded the death knell for this aircraft program. In the event, this trade panel, which is meant to be bipartisan and is meant to be independent, it had been widely expected to uphold those tariffs, but instead said no. Boeing hadn't stated its case, it hadn't made its point, and Bombardier was not acting illegally as far as it was concerned.
And a surprise decision, this.
Yes, it was a surprise decision because in the age of America First, as we've just been hearing, in a week when the US administration has imposed tariffs on imports of things like washing machines and solar panels, even though this trade commission is supposed to be technically independent, it had been widely expected to go with the flow, take the government line and favour the American manufacturer. In the end, it didn't. And yes, that did come as a shock.
Theo Leggett. The president of the Democratic Republic of Congo was supposed to step down at the end of his mandate in December 2016. But despite many protests and calls for him to go, Joseph Kabila is still hanging on. Now he's given a rare press conference, his first in more than 5 years. He was asked when the elections would be held and whether he would consider standing down.
The electoral calendar that has already been published is very clear, in the sense that you have a timeline for the elections to be organized. And as soon as those elections are organized, and as soon as we have a winner for those elections, then the answer is very clear to your question. But I've always also stated that probably the most important thing is not necessarily the elections, but what's more important is what happens after. Do you have chaos, or do you have stability, relative stability, in order for the country to go forward?
Political instability and conflicts have left the Democratic Republic of Congo with little in the way of infrastructure. In North and South Kivu province, there aren't enough schools, but even in areas where they exist, it's often not safe for girls to walk to them. For Vumi Lenata, the problem is that her mother simply can't afford to pay for her education. But where she lives, near the town of Uvira, there's another option: learning via the radio. The BBC's William Edmondson met her and Vumi's teacher Jean to find out more.
Professeur, demandez aux élèves de citer les planètes du système solaire.
Right, you're the professor, Jean. What's that about?
They are talking about the instruction which is on the radio, because from the lessons which are broadcasting from the radio station, they are telling teachers or assistant teachers who are in the classroom to instruct the student how they have to do.
What's going on here, Jean?
Yeah, that is pause-response.
So this is when the children do their answers.
So the teacher is instructing the students what they have to do.
Professeur, demandez aux élèves de citer les planètes du système solaire.
Okay, that's the instructions for Jean to ask the question. The background music, which is starting to drive me a bit mad, is Jean's speaking time. Jean, go for it.
Chers élèves, vous pouvez répéter les planètes du système solaire qu'on a citées avant.
Right, well, Vumi's here, no pressure. Vumi, do you remember some of those planets?
Mercure, Vénus, Terre, Jupiter, Platon, Uranus.
Not bad. Pas mal. Under pressure with the microphone. Merci beaucoup. So, Jean, you're the professor. I get the impression you like this job.
Yes, for sure, yes. Yeah. You know, something which is coming deeply into my heart is to see how we are helping these children whom they didn't have even any luck to go back to school. And once we are helping them and to see how they are moving on with these lessons, which are based on the national curriculum, is something which is coming deeply into my heart, how to help them.
And when they reintegrate into the national education system, do they perform well?
For sure, yes, they are doing it. Most of them, they are the fifth in the classroom. Like
they're coming top of the class when they go back in the state system.
Yes, like Vumi Lenata was the fourth in the formal classes, because after finishing our classes, she joined the formal school, and there she's performing so nicely.
So, Vumi, why do children like you go and learn like this rather than in schools?
Most of us, we are not having the economic means to support our studies. And for sure, World Child Canada came with these centers. That is why we joined these centers.
And is it also true that there is a problem for security with girls being able to travel to school? Is that true?
Normally, we are not having uniform in the centers. So when we are moving from our villages or from our home place going to school, most of people, they cannot understand where we are going. They are feeling safe to be not wearing a uniform.
What do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah, in my life, I want to be a doctor because on my time, my mother felt sick, and when I was seeing how the doctors was dealing with this situation, it touched me so much into my heart, and I said I have to be a doctor so that I can help other people who will be sick as my mother was before.
That report by William Edmondson. Now, if you've ever been bitten by a mosquito, then you might be interested in this. Researchers from the United States found that waving your arms around or trying to swat the insects will actually decrease your chances of being bitten again. Richard Hamilton explains.
The researchers from the University of Washington in Seattle found that mosquitoes can actually learn to associate a particular odour or smell with an unpleasant shock or a slap. As a consequence, they will avoid the smell of a person who tries to swat them. Assistant Professor Clément Vinoget, now at Virginia Tech, was the lead researcher. He explains how they carried out their experiment in the laboratory.
We trained the mosquitoes by exposing them to both the scent of someone and pairing this smell with a punishment. And a punishment in that case was a vibration. So we just shook the mosquitoes. They were shaken, basically. So the next day, we tested the behavior of the mosquitoes by releasing them in a device where we could test whether they were still responding to the odor, the scent of the person. And basically what we found is that after being trained, the mosquitoes learned and remembered to avoid the punishment. And so they are no longer responding to the original scent.
If you feel that you are unfairly targeted by mosquitoes, then you're probably right, and not just being paranoid. Earlier research has shown that mosquitoes don't bite at random, but have clear preferences for some people over others. This latest study shows they're even more sophisticated than previously thought, and demonstrates how their ability to learn influences their biting preferences. The scientists believe these findings may have important implications in the future for mosquito control and the transmission of diseases.
Richard Hamilton. You're listening to Global News, the most important stories and the best interviews and on-the-spot reporting from the BBC World Service. Every weekend you can hear a review of the week's main news stories and why they matter. That's in the world this week, and the programme is also available to download from our website. That's www.bbc.co.uk/programmes. Now, while British Prime Minister Theresa May received very warm words from President Trump at Davos this week, back home she's facing a much more difficult time. Why? Brexit, of course, as tensions grow between those who want a clean break from the EU and those who want more modest changes. Some in the governing Conservative Party are openly expressing their frustration with Mrs May's leadership. Well, a key figure in the Brexit negotiations, David Davis, has tried to play down the differences over the terms of the transition. He said Britain would be able to strike new trade deals outside the EU while continuing to trade within it on the same terms as before.
For the first time in more than 40 years, we'll be able to step out and sign new trade deals with old friends and new allies around the globe. Increasingly, we are trading with the key emerging markets of the world in the Asias and Americas. The UK's fastest growing export markets between 2005 and 2014 included countries like China and Brazil. These are the future.
I asked our UK correspondent Rob Watson why this transition phase was so important.
Both the European Union and the United Kingdom are keen to avoid what's been referred to as a cliff edge, so a chaotic exit which leaves everybody, both sides of the channel, rather confused. And I think we've learned some important things about the way Britain views that transition. The first, which is, I think it's going to come as a big disappointment to many Leave voters, is that the UK is effectively going to stay in the EU for another 2 years, with everything that entails for immigration from Europe and accepting EU laws. Secondly, and we've just been hearing that from David Davis, that the UK wants this freedom to negotiate these free trade deals, which were promised by the Leave campaign, which so far show no sign of appearing. And as for those divisions, well, they're hardly a surprise to many of our listeners. We know that the Conservative Party is deeply divided over Europe, but I think what makes this rather different is that Brexit is no longer, the clock is ticking, Brexit is no longer theoretical, real decisions need to be made, and it's that which is bringing those divisions to the surface.
As you say, these divisions coming to the surface as Brexit looms ever closer, and questions once again about the Prime Minister's leadership.
Yes, and again, that is something new, that she seems to have managed to get both the pro and anti-European wings of the party wondering again, is this woman really up to it? Got them wondering about her failings as a leader, not just over Brexit, but over everything else. And I think that really means that there is potentially a huge amount of turbulence ahead in British politics. It doesn't necessarily mean that Theresa May is going to be turfed out of office, but it certainly means that she is under great pressure. And I think what we're looking at is history in the making, being brought on by the huge pressure of this almighty history-changing event, which we all know as Brexit.
Rob Watson. A special commission to purge and reform the national police force in Honduras has called an emergency meeting after a report that the country's highest-ranking policeman was involved in aiding drug traffickers in 2013. The Associated Press report claims the head of the Honduran National Police helped to facilitate the shipment of almost a ton of cocaine with an estimated street value of around $20 million. Our Central America correspondent Will Grant reports.
The Honduran government has reacted angrily to the Associated Press, saying its report was based on fake information that doesn't pertain to any official communication from the Honduran police. Still, this will not be easy for them to shrug off. The AP says it has obtained a confidential government report which shows the country's top policeman, José David Aguilar, assisted in the delivery of almost a ton of cocaine to a drug cartel in 2013. Specifically, it alleges that corrupt officers escorted a truck loaded with cocaine to the home of Wilter Blanco, a drug trafficker currently serving a 20-year jail sentence in the US. When a lower-ranking officer stopped the truck and arrested one of the policemen involved, it is alleged that José Aguilar stepped in to secure both his officer's release and the safe passage of the drug shipment. Last week, Mr. Aguilar was sworn in as the head of the National Police Force, a body that has long been accused of having links to drug trafficking, and vowed to continue purging the force under the auspices of a special commission. It is our responsibility to verify this story and take the respective decisions, said Alberto Solosano, a key member of the commission, before announcing an emergency meeting on Friday. With just hours to go before President Juan Orlando Hernández is inaugurated for a second term, this is a significant scandal at the very top of his government. So far, the US State Department has made no comment on the accusations against Mr. Aguilar, with Honduras one of its key allies in the region.
Will Grant. The funeral has been held in Lyon of the French chef Paul Bocuse, who was known as the Pope of French cooking. Hundreds of chefs from around the world attended the ceremony in the city's cathedral. Paul Bocuse died a week ago at the age of 91. Hugh Schofield reports.
All the top names in French gastronomy, Alain Ducasse, Joël Robuchon and Sophie Pic, came to say goodbye to a man who'd been their inspiration and in many cases their teacher. Dressed in their chef's whites, they stood in the aisles as Paul Bocuse's coffin was carried into the cathedral. Paul Bocuse came from a family of cooks going back to the 18th century. His great contribution after World War II, in which he fought, was to lead French cooking out of its heavy classical tradition and into the celebration of lighter, fresher fare. He never moved far from his roots, which were here in Lyon, on the banks of the River Saône. The chef, Pierre Troisgros, was among the mourners.
Paul, the Saône, your dear river, is in pain. It's overflowing with sadness. But we won't be sad. You wouldn't have wanted that. You, who had so much fun all your life.
Paul Bocuse will be buried in the family vault in the village of Collonges-au-Mont d'Or, just north of Lyon. It's there that his father used to run a modest inn, l'Auberge du Pont, which Paul Bocuse turned into an internationally renowned temple of French cuisine. Paul Bocuse was born in the inn in 1926, and it was in the same room in the inn that he died.
Hugh Schofield reporting. A new podcast that attracts millions is the stuff of dreams for the people behind them. And one new one, Pod Save America, seems to be doing just that. It was set up by 3 former Obama speechwriters and aides. Unlike much of the talk radio in the US, they're firmly Democrat, but they've attracted a healthy audience. Luke Jones went to speak to them when they came to London.
If podcasts weren't ubiquitous enough, this one has gone on tour. Why do a podcast? Why not continue in politics in a usual way?
I don't know if you saw this, but Trump won.
So why a podcast then?
That's really all we could get.
It was all they let us do.
We tried some other avenues.
We tried to sell a couple other TV ideas,
Just didn't work.
They were like,
someone said, here's a microphone. Maybe some people will listen.
Here's the beauty of podcasting. No one can stop you. There's no one in charge of the whole operation who says, oh, no, that can't be a podcast. Anything can be.
These Obama alumni are taking this highly partisan chat show across a number of European capitals.
Hello, Oslo, and welcome to Pod Save America. I'm John Favreau.
I'm John Lovett.
I'm Tommy Vitor. I believe the White House has already referred to your country as Normway.
It's not a joke.
So we are, that's true.
How popular is the podcast?
We know downloads per episode.
Yeah. What are they?
Really good.
1.5 million to 2 million sometimes.
Yeah. So that's good enough to turn a profit?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Do you guys take salaries? I saw it somewhere said that you didn't.
We did not for the first, 6 months?
Yeah.
And then we did. You want our tax returns? We're making money hand over fist. Leave us alone.
Saying stuff that it's really not okay to say on TV. Topic that really gets my goat.
Most of US television and radio these days is a shouting match. Outlets clearly divided down party lines.
That's correct. That you have to actually curse to quote the president of the United
Such as
States.
the network MSNBC versus Fox News.
Hillary Clinton and the organized criminal enterprise parading as
The country's incredibly divided. Are you making that worse?
No. Definitely not. No, we're trying to look. One of the reasons we did this is because when we turned on television news and see two talking heads screaming at each other, just because one might be a Republican and one might be a Democrat, I don't think that's helping anything because no one's learning anything from the two of them screaming at each other. Where you can learn something is if you have like a longer, subtle, and nuanced conversation about an issue, about politics. And so we are trying to, we're honest about the fact that we're partisans. We don't try to hide that from people. But we try to use facts and argument.
Are you the other side of the coin to ultra-conservative talk radio?
No, because they propagate conspiracy theories, and they lie all the time. And they never try to correct their lies. We try to tell the truth as much as we can, and if we make a mistake, we correct ourselves.
You're all former comms people, I think that's fair to say. Is there part of you which quite appreciates what Donald Trump has managed to do? If you take it from your perspective that he doesn't know what he's doing, hasn't got any experience, but he's managed to get to being president of the US.
I guess I could see it that way, but I also could see it like this. Like if you sat down to play checkers with somebody, and instead of playing by the normal rules, you just decided that you got to take your fist and wipe all their pieces off the board, and then you win, I don't know that shows a lot of skill. Like, I'm not impressed by shameless nationalism and appealing to racism. Like, I think that is, there's a long, dark history in countries around the world of politicians using those tools to get elected.
This is your land, this is your home, and it's your voice that matters the most. So speak up, be heard, and fight, fight, fight.
Have you considered the possibility that the economy will keep ticking over quite nicely as it is, and a lot of voters will say, I've got a little bit more in my pocket, who cares if he offends some countries?
Look, one of the lessons we took away from 2016 is that it's more useful to spend time talking about what you want to happen than predicting what will happen.
Because no one can predict anything anymore.
Right. And
people just cannot do that.
We know that. We learn that every day.
Right. So I think what we're focused on is making the case for Democrats to win the House and win the Senate in 2018 and start holding Donald Trump accountable and making case for different policies.
Look, he could absolutely win. It's a 50-50 country. You know, we never know. So that's why the work to prevent that from happening has to start right now. You can't wait.
Like so much of the US media, this podcast has its audience and it's doubling down on them. This is the resistance firing up the willing. It's not about reaching across the aisle.
That report by Luke Jones. And that's all from us for now, but an updated version of the Global News podcast will be available for you to download later. But just before we go, we'd like to tell you that we will be in Washington next week for President Trump's first State of the Union address. We'll be doing a special podcast. Are you currently listening in Washington? If so, and if you'd like to take part, then email us. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. I'm Jeanette Jalil. Until next time, goodbye.